The widow Helena Kensington stood at the edge of the Missouri River dock in St. Louis, her hands trembling as she clutched the small leather satchel that contained everything she owned in this world, watching the paddle-wheel riverboat named River Queen bob gently against its moorings while wondering if the captain would turn her away just like everyone else had. It was the summer of 1867, 2 years after the war had ended and taken her husband with it. The humid air clung to her black morning dress, now faded to a dusty gray from too many washings and too many miles traveled. Helena had sold their farm in Ohio piece by piece to pay off debts she never knew existed until Thomas died at Appomattox just days before Lee's surrender. The cruelty of that timing still felt like a knife between her ribs. She had been 23 when Thomas marched away. Now at 25, she felt decades older, worn down by grief and the harsh reality that a woman alone had few options in this world. Her plan was simple but desperate. Get to Madisonville, Texas, where her cousin Margaret had written that there was work in her husband's general store. The letter was 6 months old, crumpled from being read and reread, but it was the only thread of hope Helena had left to grasp. The problem was passage. The stagecoach cost more than she possessed, and the overland journey alone would be dangerous for a woman traveling without protection. The riverboat could take her down the Mississippi to New Orleans, then along the coast to Texas. But she had already been turned away from 3 vessels this morning, their captains taking one look at her worn dress and nearly empty purse before shaking their heads. The River Queen was her last chance before nightfall. Helena straightened her shoulders, tucked a strand of honey-colored hair back under her bonnet, and walked up the gangplank before her courage could fail her. The deck bustled with activity. Dock workers loaded crates and barrels while crew members shouted instructions back and forth. The smell of river water mixed with coal smoke from the twin smokestacks. Helena approached a man in a first mate's uniform who was checking items off on a clipboard. "Excuse me, sir. I need to speak with the captain about passage to Texas." The first mate barely glanced up. "Captain's in the wheelhouse, up those stairs, but he's busy preparing to depart." Helena climbed the narrow wooden stairs to the upper deck. The wheelhouse stood at the front of the vessel, its large windows offering a view of the entire river ahead. Through the glass, she could see a tall figure standing at the ship's wheel, his back to her. She knocked on the door frame. "We are not taking any more passengers." "The manifest is full," the man said without turning around. "Please, I only need to speak with you for a moment." The captain turned, and Helena found herself looking at a man who seemed carved from the same hardwood as his ship's wheel. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years on the river and eyes the color of the sky before a storm. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his worn but clean shirt. He wore a leather vest and had the build of someone who worked alongside his crew rather than just giving orders. "I said the manifest is full, miss. Try the Liberty Belle. She leaves tomorrow morning." I tried the Liberty Belle, and the Prairie Rose and the Missouri Maiden. "None of them will take me because I cannot pay full fare." Helena forced herself to meet his gaze. "But I can work. I am strong, I learn quickly, and I am not afraid of hard labor. I just need to get to Texas." The captain's expression remained unchanged. "This is not a passenger vessel that employs staff for passage. We run a tight crew and I have no positions available. I can cook, clean, mend sails, scrub decks, anything you need. I have a cook. My crew handles the sails and deck maintenance." He turned back to his instruments, clearly dismissing her. Desperation made Helena bold. She stepped fully into the wheelhouse. "I can also steer a boat. My father was a ferryman on the Ohio River." I grew up on his ferry, and I have been handling watercraft since I was tall enough to reach the tiller." That got his attention. The captain turned back to her, his storm-gray eyes narrowing slightly. "You know how to pilot a riverboat. A ferry is different from a riverboat, I know. But the principles are the same. Reading the current, understanding how the vessel responds, watching for snags and sandbars. My father made sure I knew every aspect of river navigation. He said a person who earned their living on the water needed to respect it and understand it completely." The captain was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made Helena want to look away, but she held his gaze, letting him see her determination. "What's your name, Helena Kensington? You are wearing mourning clothes. Widow?" "Yes, 2 years now." "And you are traveling to Texas alone." "I have family there. A cousin in Madisonville who can provide employment." The captain walked over to the large wheel, his hand resting on one of its wooden spokes. "I am Captain James Dalton. I have been running this river for 12 years, and I have seen plenty of people desperate enough to claim skills they do not possess. If you are lying to me about your abilities, it could put my boat, my cargo, and my crew at risk." "I am not lying, Captain Dalton." He seemed to consider this. "My pilot, Mr. Garrett, is getting older. His eyes are not what they used to be, though he would never admit it. Having someone who could spell him during the long stretches would be useful. But I would need to see proof that you actually know what you are talking about." Helena felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "Tell me what you need me to demonstrate. Tell me what you see out there." He gestured to the river beyond the wheelhouse windows. Helena moved to stand beside him, looking out at the broad expanse of water. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Missouri River's surface. She took her time, scanning the water the way her father had taught her. The current is stronger on the far side. You can see it in the way the water moves. There is probably a sandbar building up closer to this bank. Those ripples about 30 yards ahead and slightly left indicate something just below the surface, likely a submerged log or debris. The water color is muddy, which means recent rain upstream. That makes the current less predictable. And those birds diving near the far shore suggest shallow water there. I would keep to the center left channel if I were navigating out. Captain Dalton's expression had shifted from skepticism to something that might have been impressed. "You have a good eye. My father was a thorough teacher." "Can you read a river chart?" "Yes, sir." He pulled out a rolled map from a cubby near the wheel and spread it on the small chart table. "Show me the route from here to Cairo, Illinois." Helena studied the map, her finger tracing the path. "Down the Missouri to where it meets the Mississippi, then south past St. Genevieve. You have to watch for the Devil's Backbone formations here, and the Dogtooth Bend is tricky because the channel shifts. Then continue to the confluence at Cairo. The whole stretch is about 180 river miles, give or take, depending on how the channels are running." Captain Dalton rolled up the map. "The Devil's Backbone has wrecked more boats than I can count. Most passengers have never heard of it. I am not most passengers." For the first time, something that might have been a smile flickered across his stern face. "No, I suppose you are not." He crossed his arms, leaning back against the chart table. "Here is what I will offer, Mrs. Kensington. You can work your passage as assistant pilot. You will take shifts in the wheelhouse, learning this specific vessel under Mr. Garrett's supervision. If he deems you competent, you will be allowed to take some of the navigation duties on the easier stretches. You will also help wherever else you are needed because everyone on this boat pulls their weight. In exchange, you get passage to Galveston, Texas, which is as close as we go to Madisonville. From there, you will need to arrange your own land transport." "That is more than fair, Captain. Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. This is not a pleasure cruise. We will be on the river for several weeks and the work is hard. We load and unload cargo at every stop. The hours are long. And if Mr. Garrett tells me you cannot handle the navigation, I will put you off at the next port. Understood. Understood completely. We depart in 1 hour. Crew quarters are below deck. Ask for Betty, she is the cook. She will show you where you can stow your things. He turned back to his instruments, then paused. And Mrs. Kensington, I run a respectable vessel. Any problems with the crew, you come directly to me. Yes, Captain. Helena left the wheelhouse feeling lighter than she had in months. She found Betty, a robust woman in her 50s with flour-dusted hands and a no-nonsense manner, who showed her to a small cabin with 4 bunks. 2 were already occupied with other women's belongings. This here is where our female crew and passengers sleep. Just you, me, and Sarah right now. Sarah helps with the laundry and cabin service. You will meet her later. Betty looked Helena up and down. Captain says you are going to be working as assistant pilot. If Mr. Garrett approves my skills, yes. Betty let out a low whistle. In all my years on this river, I have never seen a woman in the wheelhouse except to look at the view. You must have impressed the captain something fierce. He does not suffer fools or liars. I hope to prove worthy of his trust. Well, you get yourself settled. We have dinner for the crew at 7 bells. You will eat with us since you are working passage, not paying passage. Helena stowed her satchel in the footlocker beneath one of the empty bunks. Her possessions were few. 3 changes of clothes, all well worn, a Bible that had been her mother's, the letters from her cousin Margaret. A tintype photograph of Thomas in his Union uniform, looking young and optimistic before the war, had ground that optimism into bloody mud. And her father's old compass, the brass worn smooth from years of handling. She held the compass for a moment, remembering her father's weathered hands guiding hers as she learned to read the river. He had died 5 years ago, never knowing she would need those skills to survive. Her mother had passed the year before that, leaving Helena alone until she married Thomas. Now even Thomas was gone, and she was alone again, but not helpless. Her father had given her skills that most women did not possess, skills that might just save her now. The River Queen's whistle blew, a deep sound that vibrated through the boat's timbers. Helena felt the engine rumble to life beneath her feet. She went up on deck to watch as the crew cast off the mooring lines. The great paddle wheel at the stern began to turn, churning the brown water white. Captain Dalton's voice rang out from the wheelhouse, giving orders. The boat pulled away from the dock with surprising grace for something so large. Helena watched St. Louis recede behind them, the city's buildings growing smaller as the River Queen found her place in the current. An older man with steel-gray hair came to stand beside Helena at the rail. He had the weathered look of someone who had spent a lifetime on the water. You must be the woman who talked her way into the wheelhouse. I am Garrett, senior pilot. Helena turned to face him. Helena Kensington. The captain said I would be working under your supervision. Mr. Garrett's eyes were sharp despite his age. What he said was that I get to decide if you are competent. There is a difference. Come with me, Mrs. Kensington. Let us see if you know even half of what you claim. She followed him up to the wheelhouse, where Captain Dalton was guiding the boat into the main channel. The captain glanced at them but said nothing, his attention focused on the river ahead. Mr. Garrett gestured to the wheel. Tell me about this vessel's handling characteristics compared to the ferry you learned on. Helena studied the large wheel and the way the boat was responding to the current. A ferry is smaller, more nimble. This boat has much more momentum, which means you have to think further ahead. The paddle wheel provides good power but can be less responsive than a propeller. The flat bottom design means she will draw less water, which is good for navigating shallow channels, but she will also be more affected by strong currents and wind. What is the most important thing to remember when piloting a river vessel at night? That you are piloting blind. You have to know the river, have memorized the charts, and understand how the boat responds to every command without hesitation. And you have to trust your instincts when things do not feel right. Mr. Garrett fired questions at her for the next 20 minutes, covering everything from how to read the water in different weather conditions to what to do if the steering mechanism failed. Helena answered each question as thoroughly as she could, drawing on everything her father had taught her and the years she had spent on his ferry. Finally, Mr. Garrett nodded slowly. "You know the theory. Now we see if you can put it into practice. Captain, with your permission." Captain Dalton stepped back from the wheel. "She is all yours, Mr. Garrett. Mrs. Kensington, take the wheel." Helena's heart pounded as she stepped up to the great wooden wheel. It was larger than what she was used to, and she could feel the power of the boat humming through it. She placed her hands on the smooth spokes. "We are heading south-southwest," Mr. Garrett said. "Keep us in the center of the channel. There is a bend coming up in about half a mile. You will start seeing it soon. The current will try to push you to the outside of the bend. Compensate early, not late. Understand?" "Yes, sir." Helena felt the river through the wheel the way her father had taught her. It was like having a conversation with the water itself, a constant back and forth of pressure and response. The River Queen was larger than anything she had ever piloted, but the principles were indeed the same. She saw the bend approaching, the way the river curved to the left. Following her instincts, she began adjusting their course, feeling the currents push against the boat's flat bottom. She turned the wheel gradually, keeping the boat steady. "Too much," Mr. Garrett said quietly. "You are overcorrecting. This vessel does not need as much as you think." Helena adjusted, reducing her turn. The boat responded smoothly, finding the center of the channel through the bend. "Better. Keep that in mind. She is big, but she is not sluggish. Respect the size, but do not overcompensate." They continued for another hour, with Mr. Garrett providing a steady stream of instruction and correction. It was intense and demanding, but Helena felt herself adapting to the River Queen's handling characteristics. When Captain Dalton finally told her she could step away from the wheel, her arms were shaking from the sustained effort of controlling the large vessel. "You did well for your first time," Mr. Garrett said. "You have the fundamentals and you have good instincts. The rest is learning this specific boat and this specific river. I will take you through the training properly. If you prove competent, you will take shifts on the easy stretches during the day. The difficult navigation and night piloting will remain mine and the captain's responsibility." "Agreed, agreed. Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Do not thank me. Thank the captain for giving you this chance. And thank your father for teaching you properly." Helena left the wheelhouse feeling exhausted but accomplished. She had passed the first test. Now she just had to prove herself over the long journey ahead. Dinner that evening was served in the crew mess, a cramped space below deck where everyone ate together. The crew was surprisingly diverse. Besides Betty and Mr. Garrett, there was Samuel, the first mate Helena had spoken to earlier, a serious man who ran the cargo operations with military precision. There were 3 deckhands, 2 Irish brothers named Patrick and Michael who did most of the heavy lifting, and a young man named Tommy who could not have been more than 18. The engineer, a sweating bear of a man named Mr. Foster, kept the steam engine running. And Sarah, a quiet woman around Helena's age who handled the passenger cabins and laundry. Captain Dalton ate with them, which surprised Helena. On some vessels, the captain kept himself separate from the crew. But James Dalton sat at the head of the table, eating the same food and engaging in the same conversation as everyone else. "So it is true?" Patrick asked, his Irish accent thick. "We have got a lady pilot now. Assistant pilot," Mr. Garrett corrected. "And only if she continues to prove herself capable." "No offense meant, Mrs. Kensington," Patrick said quickly. "It is just unusual is all. No offense taken. I know it is unusual." "Where are you heading in Texas?" Sarah asked. She had a soft voice, and Helena noticed she kept her eyes downcast most of the time. "Madisonville. My cousin lives there with her husband." "That is cattle country if I recall correctly," Samuel said. "You have family in ranching." "No, they run a general store." The conversation flowed around her, the crew discussing the cargo they were carrying and the stops they would make along the way. Helena learned that the River Queen ran a regular route from St. Louis to Galveston, carrying everything from farm equipment to fine goods from the east. They would stop at a dozen towns along the way, loading and unloading freight. Captain Dalton spoke little during the meal, but Helena noticed he listened carefully to everything his crew said. He caught her looking at him once, and their eyes met across the table. His expression was unreadable, but something in that brief connection made her pulse quicken in a way she had not felt since before Thomas died. She looked away quickly, feeling guilty. Thomas had only been gone 2 years. Was it wrong that she found herself noticing another man? After dinner, Helena helped Betty clean up the mess, then went on deck for some air. The sun was setting, painting the river gold and crimson. The Missouri stretched wide on either side with forested banks rolling past. They had left the city far behind, entering the wild country where civilization was just a thin thread of towns along the water's edge. She heard footsteps on the deck behind her and turned to find Captain Dalton approaching. He stood beside her at the rail, looking out at the darkening water. "Mr. Garrett tells me you have potential," he said. "I am glad to hear it. He also said you need to learn to trust the boat. You are piloting like someone used to a much smaller vessel. I am working on adapting. See that you do. I meant what I said about putting you off if you cannot handle it." His tone was gruff, but Helena did not sense real hostility in it. "You do not really want to put me off, do you, Captain? You need someone to help Mr. Garrett. You said yourself his eyes are not what they used to be." Captain Dalton turned to look at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. "You are observant. It is part of reading the river, noticing the things that are not said out loud." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the rhythmic splash of the paddle wheel and the distant call of night birds on the shore. "My previous pilot quit in St. Louis," Captain Dalton finally said. "Decided he wanted to try his luck in the Colorado gold fields. Mr. Garrett has been handling the piloting alone for the past month, and it is wearing on him. I have been doing some of the night navigation myself, which means I am getting even less sleep than usual. So yes, I need help. But I will not compromise the safety of this boat and everyone on it, not even out of desperation. I would not expect you to, and I will not let you down, Captain." He studied her for a long moment. "Why Texas? What is in Madisonville besides your cousin?" Helena considered how much to tell him. "A fresh start. After my husband died, I had nothing left in Ohio but debts and painful memories. My cousin wrote that her husband's store was doing well and they could use help. It is not much, but it is something. A reason to keep going. The war took him, the very end of it. Just days before Lee surrendered at Appomattox. I am sorry. That is a bitter kind of loss. Were you in the war, Captain?" "No. I kept the River Queen running supply routes for the Union, transporting goods and sometimes wounded soldiers. The river was my battlefield." He pushed away from the rail. "You should get some rest. Mr. Garrett will want you in the wheelhouse at dawn to start your training properly." Helena watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the shadows. She realized she knew almost nothing about James Dalton beyond his name and profession. He was clearly a man who kept his thoughts and feelings carefully guarded. But then, was she not doing the same thing? The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Helena would rise before dawn and report to the wheelhouse, where Mr. Garrett would put her through intensive training in navigation and boat handling. She learned the River Queen's quirks and characteristics, how she responded to different river conditions where her blind spots were, and how to judge distances on the water. When she was not in the wheelhouse, she helped wherever she was needed. She scrubbed decks alongside Tommy, helped Betty in the galley, and assisted with cargo loading when they stopped at riverside towns. The work was exhausting, and she fell into her bunk each night with aching muscles and calloused hands. But she was learning, and she was earning her passage honestly. More than that, she was part of something. The crew of the River Queen functioned like a family, each person playing their role to keep the boat running smoothly. Even the Irish brothers, who had been skeptical at first, began to accept her as one of their own. Captain Dalton remained distant but fair. He ran his boat with quiet competence, never raising his voice but somehow commanding absolute respect from his crew. Helena found herself watching him more often than she should, noticing the way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, the way his rare smiles transformed his stern face, the way he treated everyone on board with the same measured courtesy. She told herself it meant nothing. He was her employer, nothing more. And she was a widow who had no business thinking about another man, but her heart did not seem to care about such practical considerations. 2 weeks into the journey, they reached the confluence where the Missouri River met the mighty Mississippi. Helena stood at the wheel under Mr. Garrett's supervision as they made the turn south onto the great river that would carry them all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. The Mississippi was broader and more powerful than the Missouri, its muddy water rolling south with implacable force. Helena felt small in the face of such natural power, but she also felt exhilarated. This was what her father had loved about the river, its untamed strength and constant challenge. "You are doing well," Mr. Garrett said, standing beside her as she navigated the new current. "Better than I expected, if I am being honest. Most people who claim skills they learned as children have forgotten more than they remember, but you retained it all. My father made sure I understood that river skills could save my life someday. I suppose he was right. Smart man. The river can be generous, but it can also be cruel. Respect is everything." They passed through Memphis, then continued south through the heart of the Mississippi Delta. The landscape changed around them, becoming flatter and more humid. Massive plantations lined the banks, their cotton fields stretching to the horizon. Helena saw freed slaves working the fields alongside white laborers, the aftermath of the war still reshaping the South in ways both hopeful and troubled. At one stop in Mississippi, they took on a cargo of cotton and a handful of passengers. Among them was a well-dressed businessman who took one look at Helena in the wheelhouse and complained loudly to Captain Dalton that having a woman pilot was unnatural and probably dangerous. Helena was in the wheelhouse when the man came up to lodge his complaint. She heard every word. "This is highly irregular, Captain. A woman has no business operating a vessel of this size. What if she makes a mistake? What if we run aground or worse?" Captain Dalton's voice was calm but cold as winter ice. "Mrs. Kensington is a qualified pilot who has been navigating rivers since before you probably knew which end of a boat was the front. She has handled this vessel through some difficult stretches without incident." If you take issue with my crew, you are welcome to disembark at the next stop and find alternative transportation." "Well, I never the proprieties. The proprieties can wait on shore. On this boat, competence is what matters. Now if you will excuse me, I have a vessel to run." Helena felt warmth spread through her chest at the captain's defense. When the businessman had left, sputtering with indignation, Captain Dalton caught her eye. "Do not let fools like that shake your confidence. You have earned your place here." "Thank you, Captain. Just keep proving me right about giving you this chance." But there was something in his expression, a softness that had not been there before, that made Helena wonder if his defense had been about more than just protecting his crew. The days grew hotter as they traveled deeper into the south. Helena learned to read the Mississippi's moods, understanding its seasonal patterns and the way different weather systems affected the current. She took regular shifts at the wheel now, handling the easier navigation while Mr. Garrett rested or Captain Dalton attended to other duties. Sometimes she would find herself alone in the wheelhouse with the captain during the evening shift change. They would talk about the river, about the places they had seen, about the challenges of keeping a riverboat running profitably. The conversations were never personal, but Helena treasured them anyway. It was something, this quiet companionship with a man who understood the river as deeply as she did. One evening in Louisiana, a sudden summer storm swept across the river. Helena was at the wheel when the wind hit, strong enough to push the River Queen sideways in the channel. Rain lashed the wheelhouse windows, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Captain Dalton appeared instantly, taking in the situation with a practiced eye. "Can you hold her?" "Yes, sir." Helena's hands were tight on the wheel, fighting the wind's push. She could feel the boat wanting to turn broadside to the current, which would be dangerous. "There is a protected cove about half a mile ahead on the western bank. If we can reach it, we can anchor until the storm passes." "But the entrance is narrow. Think you can make it?" Helena's heart pounded. This was the first true test of her skills under difficult conditions. "I can make it. All right, I will talk you through it. Keep her steady for now." Thunder cracked overhead so loud it rattled the wheelhouse windows. Lightning illuminated the river in bright flashes, giving Helena brief snapshots of churning water and wind-bent trees on the banks. Captain Dalton stood beside her, his voice calm and steady as he guided her through the storm. "A little to port. Good. Watch that log in the water ahead. You have room to pass it on the right. Keep your speed up. We need steerage against this wind." Helena followed his instructions, but she was also trusting her own instincts, feeling the boat's responses through the wheel. The cove entrance appeared in a lightning flash, narrow and lined with trees. "Start your turn now. Nice and easy. Too sharp and we will hit the bank. Too shallow and the wind will push us past." Helena made the turn, every muscle in her body tense with concentration. The River Queen responded beautifully, swinging into the cove entrance with just feet to spare on either side. They slipped into the protected water, and suddenly, the wind's fury was muted. The boat settled, riding at anchor in the relative calm while the storm raged on the main river. Helena realized her hands were shaking. She had done it. She had successfully navigated through dangerous conditions into a safe harbor. "Well done," Captain Dalton said quietly. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, a brief touch that sent electricity through her. "That was excellent piloting, Mrs. Kensington." She turned to look at him and found his face closer than she expected. Rain had blown in through the open wheelhouse door, dampening his hair and shirt. His gray eyes were intense in the storm light, and Helena suddenly found it hard to breathe. "I had a good teacher guiding me," she managed to say. "No, you have the skills already. I just reminded you to trust them." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. Then Mr. Garrett came into the wheelhouse, breaking the spell. "Fine work getting us to shelter. That storm is a mean one." Captain Dalton stepped back, his expression closing off. "Mrs. Kensington handled it well. She has proved herself as far as I am concerned. From this point on, she is a full pilot on this vessel, not an assistant." Helena felt pride swell in her chest. "Thank you, Captain. You earned it." The storm blew itself out over the next few hours. By morning, the river was calm again, and they continued their journey south. But something had changed between Helena and James Dalton. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression thoughtful. And she knew she was watching him too, drawn to his quiet strength and the gentleness she glimpsed beneath his stern exterior. She tried to deny her growing feelings. She was a widow in mourning, and he was her employer. Nothing could come of this attraction. Besides, once they reached Galveston, she would leave the River Queen forever and travel to Madisonville to start her new life. Whatever connection she felt to James Dalton would have to remain unspoken and unacted upon. But the heart, Helena was learning, did not always listen to reason. They reached Vicksburg, where the war's scars were still visible in the pocked buildings and occupied streets. The River Queen took on cargo and passengers, then continued south through the widening river. Baton Rouge passed. Then New Orleans, that exotic city of mixed cultures and languages where they stayed docked for 3 days while taking on a large cargo bound for Texas. Helena explored the city with Sarah and Betty, marveling at the French Quarter's architecture and the amazing mixture of people. But she found herself eager to return to the boat, to the wheelhouse where she knew Captain Dalton would be checking the charts and preparing for the next leg of their journey. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her as she walked back to the River Queen through New Orleans' bustling streets. She was falling in love with James Dalton, with his competence and his integrity, with the way he ran his boat like a small democracy, with his rare smiles and his passionate understanding of the river, and she had no idea what to do about it. The journey from New Orleans to Galveston took them along the Gulf Coast, a different kind of navigation that required new skills. The water was saltier here, the tides more pronounced. Mr. Garrett continued to teach her, and Helena absorbed every lesson eagerly. One afternoon, as they traveled along the Texas coast, Captain Dalton asked her to join him in the wheelhouse. Mr. Garrett was napping below, and the river was calm. "Take the wheel, Mrs. Kensington. I need to check our position against the charts." Helena took her place at the wheel, guiding the River Queen along the coastal route. Captain Dalton spread charts on the table, making calculations and notes. The wheelhouse was quiet except for the sound of the engine and the ever-present splash of the paddle wheel. "May I ask you something personal, Captain?" Helena said after a while. He looked up from the charts. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Why did you become a riverboat captain? What drew you to this life?" He was quiet for so long she thought he would not respond. Then he set down his pencil and came to stand beside her at the wheel. "I grew up in a small town in Illinois. My father wanted me to take over his dry goods store. It was a good life, respectable and predictable. But I used to watch the riverboats pass on the Mississippi, and I felt like they were calling to me. When I was 18, I ran away and hired on as a deckhand. My father never forgave me for it." "You regret your choice?" "Not for a moment. The river is in my blood. I cannot imagine living any other way." He paused. "Though it is a lonely life sometimes. Most women do not want to be tied to a man who is always traveling, who might be gone for weeks or months at a time." Helena's heart beat faster. "Is that why you never married?" "Part of it. I was engaged once, years ago. She gave me an ultimatum, the river or her. I chose the river." He looked out at the water. She married a banker and has 4 children now, from what I hear. A good, stable life in Chicago. Do you wish you had chosen differently? Sometimes. When I see couples with their families, building a life together. But I could not be happy trapped on land, and she could not be happy with a husband who was always gone, so it was the right choice for both of us, even if it hurt at the time. Helena understood what he was really saying. That he believed himself unsuited for marriage, for a traditional family life. That any woman who cared for him would face a difficult choice between following him on the river or living apart. It should have discouraged her. Instead, it made her realize something important. She did not want a traditional life either. The years on her husband's farm had been fine but never truly fulfilling. She had loved Thomas, but she had not loved the life he offered. The endless domestic routine, the isolation, the expectation that she would be content as just a farmer's wife. On the River Queen, she had found something else. Purpose, challenge, a role that used her skills and intelligence. The river called to her blood the same way it called to James Dalton's. "What about you?" he asked, breaking into her thoughts. "Will you be happy working in a general store in Texas?" The question caught her off guard with its perception. "It is what I need to do. My cousin is offering me a place when I have nowhere else to go." "That is not what I asked." Helena met his gaze. "No, I do not think I will be happy. But sometimes we have to accept the lives available to us rather than the lives we would choose. Do we?" His voice was soft. "Or do we have the courage to choose differently?" The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then the River Queen's whistle sounded, signaling an approaching vessel, and the spell was broken. They reached Galveston 3 days later, the Texas port city bustling with activity. The River Queen would stay docked for a week, unloading and reloading cargo before beginning the return journey to St. Louis. Helena's time on the boat was coming to an end. She had inquired about transportation to Madisonville, which was about 60 miles northwest. The stagecoach ran twice weekly, and there was a departure the morning after they arrived. Everything was falling into place for her to continue her journey to her cousin's home. So, why did she feel like her heart was being torn in two? That evening, the crew held a small celebration dinner in Helena's honor. Betty made a special meal, and even Mr. Foster cleaned the engine grease off his hands to join them. They toasted her with whiskey that Samuel produced from some secret store. "To Helena," Mr. Garrett said, raising his glass. "The finest natural pilot I have had the privilege to teach. May your skills never rust." "Hear, hear," the crew chorused. Helena felt tears prick her eyes. These people had become family in the few weeks she had known them. Leaving them felt wrong. Captain Dalton had been quiet through the celebration. Now he stood. "Mrs. Kensington came to us desperate and determined. She proved herself through hard work and genuine skill. She has been an asset to this crew and to the River Queen. It has been an honor to have her aboard." He raised his glass to her, and their eyes met across the table. Helena saw something in his expression that made her breath catch, something that looked like longing carefully controlled. After dinner, she went on deck for some air. The Galveston docks were lively even at night, with sailors and dock workers moving between the vessels. Gas lamps lit the waterfront, creating pools of yellow light in the darkness. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without looking that it was James Dalton. "You leave tomorrow," he said, coming to stand beside her at the rail. "Yes, the morning stage to Madisonville. You will do well there. Your cousin is fortunate to have you. Captain, I." Helena did not know how to say what she was feeling, that she did not want to leave. That the thought of never seeing him again felt like losing Thomas all over again. That somewhere in the past weeks she had found not just employment but belonging. "James," he said quietly. "What?" My name is James. You do not have to call me Captain anymore. Your employment technically ended when we docked." Helena turned to face him. James, then. He was looking at her with such intensity that it made her shiver. "I have tried not to do this. You are under my employ and it would be taking advantage, and you are still in mourning. But I cannot let you leave without telling you." Her heart pounded. "Telling me what?" "That you have steered your way straight into my life in a way I never expected. That watching you in the wheelhouse, seeing your determination and skill, hearing your laugh when Patrick tells his terrible jokes, has made me think about things I gave up on years ago. That I do not want you to get on that stage tomorrow." Helena could hardly breathe. "I do not want to get on that stage either." "You do not?" "No, James, I have been trying to ignore what I feel. It seemed wrong, disrespectful to Thomas's memory. But the truth is, I think I fell in love with you somewhere between St. Louis and here, with your honor and your strength. With the way you run this boat and care for your crew, with your passion for the river that matches my own." James reached up and gently cupped her face with his hand. His palm was calloused from years of work, warm against her skin. "You are sure? This life is hard. The river is demanding. I can offer you a place on my boat, a role as pilot, but I cannot offer you a settled home or an easy life. I do not want easy. I want real. I want to be on the river using my skills, working alongside you. If you are offering me that, then yes, I am very sure." "Then do not get on that stage tomorrow. Stay, be my pilot and—" He paused, seeming to gather courage. "And in time, if you are willing, be more than that, be my partner in every sense." Helena felt joy flood through her, bright and fierce. "Yes, to all of it, yes." James pulled her close and kissed her, a gentle kiss that held the promise of everything to come. Helena kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, finally allowing herself to feel the love that had been building for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I need to send a telegram to my cousin," Helena said. "She will be expecting me tomorrow. Tonight, just stay here with me." They stood together at the rail, watching the lights of Galveston and holding each other close. Helena thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the grief and desperation in St. Louis to this moment of joy. She had lost so much, but she had also found something precious. A new life, a new love, and a place where she truly belonged. The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Helena sent a long telegram to her cousin Margaret, explaining that she had found employment as a riverboat pilot and would not be coming to Madisonville after all. Margaret's return telegram was full of surprise, but also congratulations and wishes for Helena's happiness. The crew of the River Queen was delighted when Helena announced she was staying permanently. Betty insisted on throwing another celebration, and the Irish brothers declared it the best news they had heard all year. "Finally," Mr. Garrett said with a knowing smile. "I wondered how long it would take you two to figure out what everyone else could see plain as day." Helena and James grew closer as they prepared for the return journey to St. Louis. They stole moments together whenever they could, learning each other in the small ways that matter. Helena discovered that James loved chess but was terrible at it, that he had a weakness for Betty's apple pie, that he could quote poetry when he thought no one was listening, that he carried a pocket watch his mother had given him before she died, and he checked it religiously. James learned that Helena sang while she worked, usually old river songs her father had taught her, that she was left-handed, which made her handwriting slant in an unusual way, that she was fiercely protective of anyone she considered under her care, that she had a scar on her forearm from a childhood accident on her father's ferry, and she rubbed it unconsciously when she was nervous. They began the return journey, with Helena taking regular piloting shifts. The crew quickly adjusted to having two pilots working in rotation with Mr. Garrett, who was visibly relieved to have the burden shared. One afternoon, as they traveled through Mississippi, Mr. Garrett called James and Helena into the wheelhouse together. He was at the wheel, guiding them through a relatively easy stretch. "I have something to tell you both," he said. "When we get back to St. Louis, I am retiring." Helena felt a jolt of surprise. "Mr. Garrett, no, you are the best pilot on this river." "I was the best pilot on this river. But I am 62 years old, and my body is telling me it is time to quit while I still can. My daughter has been asking me to come live with her family in Ohio for years. I think it is time I took her up on it." He looked at them both. "But I am only comfortable retiring, because I know the River Queen will be in good hands. Mrs. Kensington, you have learned faster than anyone I have ever taught. Captain, you have been navigating this river since you were a boy. Between the two of you, this boat will be fine." James gripped Mr. Garrett's shoulder. "You will be missed, but I understand you have earned your rest." After Mr. Garrett left the wheelhouse, James turned to Helena. "He is right, you know. You are an exceptional pilot, the best I have worked with. I had exceptional teachers." "Take the compliment, Helena. You have earned it," she smiled. "All right, thank you." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the river roll by. "I have been thinking," James said after a while, "about the future, about what we are building here." "And what are we building?" "A partnership, a life together. I know it has only been a few weeks since we acknowledged our feelings, but I am not a young man anymore, Helena. I am 30 years old, and I know what I want. I want you, as my pilot, as my partner, and as my wife." Helena's heart soared. "Is this a proposal, Captain Dalton?" "It is. I do not have a ring yet, and this is not the romantic setting you deserve, but yes. Helena Kensington, will you marry me?" She did not hesitate. "Yes, absolutely yes." James pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they were in full view of anyone who might look up at the wheelhouse. When they finally broke apart, Helena was laughing. "We are supposed to be navigating. The river can wait another minute. I just got engaged." They were married in St. Louis 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at a small church near the docks. The entire crew of the River Queen attended, along with a few other riverboat captains who were friends of James. Helena wore a new dress, pale blue instead of morning black, and Betty wove flowers into her hair. James wore his best suit and looked more nervous than Helena had ever seen him. But when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. Helena spoke her own vows with equal certainty. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. After the ceremony, they had a celebration on board the River Queen. Someone produced a fiddle, and they danced on the deck while the sun set over the Mississippi. Helena danced with James, with Mr. Garrett, with the Irish brothers, and with everyone else who had become her found family. That night, in the captain's cabin that was now their shared space, James held Helena close. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "More than I have ever been. Is that wrong? Should I feel guilty for being this happy when I was in mourning such a short time ago? No, Thomas would want you to be happy. And you honored his memory by surviving, by continuing on when it would have been easier to give up. But you are allowed to live, Helena. You are allowed to love again." She kissed him. "I do love you so very much. I love you too. My heart, my partner, my wife." They made love for the first time that night, a gentle joining that sealed their commitment to each other. Afterward, Helena lay in James's arms, listening to the familiar sounds of the river lapping against the hull, feeling more at home than she ever had on land. Life on the River Queen settled into a new rhythm. Helena and James worked as partners in every sense, sharing the responsibilities of running the boat and navigating the river. Mr. Garrett had retired as promised, leaving Helena as the primary pilot alongside James. She proved herself again and again, earning the respect of not just their crew but of other riverboat captains up and down the Mississippi. Some still thought it scandalous that a woman should be piloting a vessel, but most of the river community came to accept Helena. Her skills spoke for themselves, and James's unwavering support gave her the confidence to ignore those who disapproved. They traveled the route between St. Louis and Galveston, carrying cargo and passengers, navigating seasons and weather. Helena learned to read the river in all its moods, from the high water of spring floods to the treacherous low water of late summer. She and James developed a seamless working relationship, often able to anticipate each other's thoughts and needs. The crew remained mostly stable, with only occasional changes as crew members moved on to other opportunities. Betty continued to rule the galley with an iron fist and a kind heart. Samuel ran cargo operations with his usual efficiency. The Irish brothers provided muscle and comic relief in equal measure. And Sarah, who had always been quiet, gradually opened up and became one of Helena's closest friends. The first Christmas of their marriage, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She told James late one evening in the wheelhouse as they navigated through moonlight on the Mississippi. "I saw a doctor in Memphis. He confirmed it. We are going to have a baby." James's face lit up with joy. He pulled her into his arms, careful even in his excitement. "A baby, our child." "Helena, that is wonderful. Are you sure? A baby on a riverboat will not be easy. Easy has never been our path, but this is a good boat and we have a good crew. We will make it work," and they did. Helena continued piloting through her pregnancy, only stepping back in the last month when her balance became uncertain on the moving deck. She gave birth in New Orleans in the summer of 1868, attended by a skilled midwife and with Betty and Sarah at her side. James paced the deck outside, driving the crew to distraction with his worry, until Samuel finally ordered him to go sit down before he wore a hole in the planking. When the midwife finally emerged and told him he had a son, James rushed into the cabin. Helena sat propped up with pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a small bundle. "Come meet your son," she said softly. James approached almost reverently. He looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. I cannot believe we made this little person. What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. James was quiet for a moment, looking at his son. "Thomas, after your first husband. He should be remembered and honored." Helena felt tears stream down her face. "Are you certain?" "I am. Thomas Dalton. It has a good sound." So their son was named Thomas, called Tommy to avoid confusion with the young deckhand. Baby Tommy proved to be a good traveler, content to sleep in a specially built cradle that Betty helped design to stay stable despite the boat's movement. The crew doted on him, and he grew up surrounded by love and the constant motion of the river. Helena returned to piloting when Tommy was 3 months old, taking shifts when he was sleeping or when Betty or Sarah could watch him. She and James found a rhythm that worked, balancing their responsibilities to the boat and to their growing family. When Tommy was 2, they welcomed a daughter they named Rose, after James's mother. Rose proved to be as much a river child as her brother, fearless and curious about everything. She took her first steps on the deck of the River Queen, laughing as the boat's motion made her stumble. Life was not always easy. There were storms and accidents, narrow escapes from sandbars and river pirates, lean times when cargo was scarce, and abundant times when they had more freight than they could carry. But through it all, Helena and James faced each challenge together, their love and partnership only growing stronger. One evening, when Tommy was 5 and Rose was 3, Helena stood at the rail watching the sunset paint the Mississippi in shades of gold and crimson. James came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Choosing this life instead of the security of your cousin's store in Madisonville?" Helena leaned into him, watching their children play with a bit of rope under Betty's watchful eye. Tommy was teaching Rose to tie knots, his young face serious with concentration. "Not for a single moment. This is where I belong. On this river with you, with our family. You were right that day in Galveston. It took courage to choose differently, but it was the right choice. You steered yourself straight into my life and changed everything. I was resigned to being alone, to having only the river, but you showed me I could have both, the river I love and a family to share it with. We found each other at exactly the right moment, when we both needed something more than we had." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The River Queen's paddle wheel turned steadily, carrying them forward through the water and through their life together. Years passed in this way, measured in journeys from St. Louis to Galveston and back again. Helena and James became legendary figures on the Mississippi, the captain and his pilot wife who ran one of the most reliable vessels on the river. Young men seeking to learn the piloting trade would specifically request to serve on the River Queen, knowing they would receive excellent training. Tommy and Rose grew up as river children, as comfortable on a boat as most children were on land. Tommy showed an early aptitude for engineering, spending hours with Mr. Foster learning about the steam engine. Rose, surprisingly, showed artistic talent, filling sketchbooks with detailed drawings of river scenes and the people they encountered. When Tommy was 12, he announced he wanted to become a riverboat captain like his father. James began training him seriously, teaching him navigation and boat handling. But he also insisted Tommy get a formal education, arranging for tutors at their main stops and ensuring his son could read, write, and cipher as well as pilot. Rose, at 10, declared she was going to be an artist in St. Louis or New Orleans. Helena supported her daughter's dreams while also teaching her practical skills. Rose learned piloting too, though more as a way to understand her parents' world than from any desire to make it her career. In 1878, when Helena was 36 and James was 43, they made a decision. The River Queen was aging, and repairs were becoming more frequent and expensive. They could invest in refitting the old boat or they could invest in something new. They chose new, with years of savings and a loan from a St. Louis bank. They commissioned the construction of a newer, larger steamboat. This one would have improved passenger accommodations, more cargo space, and the latest in steam engine technology. They named her the Helena Rose after Helena and their daughter. The day the new boat launched, with Helena standing beside James at the wheel and their children watching proudly, felt like the culmination of everything they had built together. The Helena Rose proved to be even more successful than the River Queen had been. They were able to run more profitable routes, take on more diverse cargo, and offer passenger service that competed with the finest boats on the river. The crew from the River Queen transferred to the new vessel, and they hired additional staff to handle the increased capacity. Betty finally retired at 70, moving to live with her daughter in St. Louis. Her replacement was a young woman named Clara who had trained under Betty for 2 years and could replicate her famous apple pie exactly. Samuel eventually became first mate and then captain of a second boat that James and Helena purchased, running parallel routes and doubling their business through it all. Helena and James remained partners in the truest sense. They worked side by side in the wheelhouse, made decisions together about their business, and raised their children with a combination of love and high expectations. On their 20th wedding anniversary, James gave Helena a gift. It was a brass compass, beautifully made with an inscription inside. "To my navigator who steers my heart. Forever yours, James." Helena held the compass, tears in her eyes. "It is beautiful. I will treasure it always. You told me once, that first day we met, that you had been handling watercraft since you were tall enough to reach the tiller. You have spent your whole life navigating, Helena. First for your father, then for survival, and finally for us. You have never wavered, never lost your way. You are the finest navigator I have ever known, on the river and in life. We navigate together. That is the secret. Neither of us alone, but both of us as one." They kissed, surrounded by their family and crew who had gathered to celebrate their anniversary. Tommy, now a licensed pilot himself at 20, raised a toast. Rose, at 18 and preparing to move to New Orleans to study art, wiped away happy tears. As Helena looked around at the life she had built, she thought back to that desperate woman who had walked up the gangplank in St. Louis 21 years earlier. She had been seeking passage, a way to survive, a thread of hope to cling to. She had found all that and so much more. She had found a home on the water, a calling that used every skill her father had given her. She had found a crew that became family. Most importantly, she had found James, a man who saw her as an equal partner, who valued her abilities, and who loved her completely. The river had given her everything. It had tested her, challenged her, and ultimately rewarded her courage to choose a different path. That evening, after the celebration had ended and the Helena Rose was anchored for the night, Helena stood in the wheelhouse with James. The river stretched dark and silver under the moonlight, eternal and ever-changing. "What are you thinking?" James asked, coming to stand behind her and wrap his arms around her waist. "I am thinking about how grateful I am. For this river, for this boat, for our family. For you, most of all. You gave me a chance when I had nothing. You saw potential when others saw only a desperate widow. You loved me when I thought I would never love again. You gave me just as much. You brought joy and partnership to a life that was fulfilling but lonely. You showed me that I did not have to choose between the river and love, that I could have both. And you gave me our children, our shared life, our future." Helena turned in his arms to face him. At 46, she had silver threading through her honey-colored hair. Laugh lines creased the corners of her eyes. Her hands were permanently calloused from years at the wheel. But she had never felt more beautiful than she did in this moment, loved completely by this good man. "Where do we go from here?" she asked. "Wherever the river takes us. Together, always together." They stood in the wheelhouse they shared, looking out at the great Mississippi River that had brought them together and given them a life beyond anything either had imagined. The water flowed south, constant and eternal, carrying dreams and cargo, joy and sorrow, the past and the future all mixed together in its muddy embrace. Helena and James had learned to read its moods, to navigate its challenges, and to trust its generosity. The river had been good to them, and they had been good to it, treating it with the respect and love it deserved. As the moon rose higher and the night sounds of the river surrounded them, Helena knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice all those years ago. When she walked up that gangplank, desperate and uncertain, she had been seeking passage. What she found instead was everything: purpose, partnership, family, and a love that would last all their remaining years. She had steered herself straight into James Dalton's life, and in doing so, she had found her way home. The years continued to flow like the river itself, bringing changes both large and small. Tommy married at 25, choosing a bright young woman named Catherine who loved the river as much as he did. They started their own freight business, running smaller boats on tributary routes, expanding the family enterprise. Tommy and Catherine's first child, a girl they named Helena after her grandmother, was born aboard their boat, continuing the family tradition. Rose pursued her art in New Orleans, becoming known for her detailed and evocative paintings of river life. Her work hung in galleries and private collections, bringing the beauty and power of the Mississippi to people who had never seen it. But she returned home frequently, traveling on the Helena Rose and sketching new scenes. She eventually married a New Orleans photographer, and together they documented the changing South in the decades after the war. James and Helena continued to captain and pilot the Helena Rose together well into their 50s. Their hair turned gray, their bodies moved a bit slower, but their skills remained sharp and their partnership remained strong. They trained a new generation of river pilots, passing on the knowledge and respect for the water that had been given to them. The river industry was changing. Railroads were expanding, offering faster transport that cut into the riverboat trade. Steam technology was being challenged by new innovations. Some of the old riverboat families were selling their vessels and moving on to other ventures. But Helena and James held on, adapting where they could, finding new niches in the market, and maintaining their reputation for reliability and safety. The Helena Rose became something of a floating landmark, known and respected throughout the river system. On Helena's 50th birthday, the entire family gathered aboard the Helena Rose for a celebration. Tommy and Catherine brought their 3 children, including young Helena, who was already showing an interest in navigation at age 10. Rose came with her husband and their 2 sons. The crew, both old and new members, joined in the festivities. They were anchored near Memphis, the summer sun warm on the deck. Tables had been set up, loaded with food. Children ran and played, their laughter mixing with the adults' conversation and the ever-present sound of the river. James stood and raised his glass. 50 years ago, Helena was born to a ferryman and his wife in Ohio. That ferryman could not have known that his daughter would become one of the finest pilots on the Mississippi River. He could not have known that the skills he taught her would save her life and change mine. But I am grateful to him every day for the gift he gave the world. Helena, my love, my partner, my navigator, happy birthday. May we have many more years together on this river we both love. Everyone drank and cheered. Helena stood, tears streaming down her face, and kissed her husband. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, 3 generations bound together by love and the river. As the sun set that evening, Helena stood at the rail with her granddaughter, young Helena, teaching her to read the current the way Helena's father had once taught her. See how the water moves differently there. Helena pointed to a spot ahead. That tells you there is something beneath the surface. You have to learn to read what the river is telling you. Will you teach me everything, Grandma, like your papa taught you? Helena looked down at the girl's eager face and smiled. I will teach you everything I know. But you have to promise me you will respect the river. It can be generous or cruel, depending on how you treat it. I promise. They stood together, 4 generations of river knowledge flowing from old hands to young ones, ensuring that the skills and respect would continue. James joined them, his arm around Helena's waist. He was 60 now, his hair completely silver, his face lined with decades of sun and wind. But his eyes were still that clear storm gray, and when he looked at Helena, they still held the same love she had seen that first day in the wheelhouse. What are you 2 plotting? He asked. Grandma is teaching me to read the river, young Helena announced proudly. Then you are in excellent hands. Your grandmother is the finest pilot I have ever known." Helena leaned into her husband, watching the sunset paint the river in familiar shades of gold and red. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperate widow to successful pilot, from working for passage to co-owning a thriving river freight business, from lonely survivor to matriarch of a loving family. The river had been her salvation and her home. James had been her partner and her heart. Together they had built something beautiful and enduring. "I love you," she whispered to James. "I love you too, now and always." The Helena Rose rocked gently in the current, surrounded by family, watched over by the endless sky. The Mississippi flowed on as it always had and always would, carrying dreams and cargo, connecting places and people, offering opportunity to those brave enough to take it. Helena had been brave enough. She had walked up that gangplank in St. Louis with nothing but determination and her father's teachings. She had convinced a stern riverboat captain to give her a chance. She had proved her skills, earned her place, and found her love. She had steered the boat and steered herself straight into a life richer and fuller than anything she could have imagined. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Helena knew that every choice, every challenge, every moment of doubt and determination had been worth it. She had found her home on the water, her calling in the wheelhouse, and her forever love in James Dalton. The river flowed on, carrying them forward together, as it always would. And Helena Dalton, once Helena Kensington, widow and ferryman's daughter, stood at the rail of her boat with her husband by her side, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together on the great Mississippi River. Their story, like the river itself, would flow on through the generations, carried forward by Tommy and his children, by Rose in her paintings, by young Helena learning to read the current. The tale of a desperate widow who found passage and love would become family legend, told and retold, inspiring future generations to be brave enough to choose their own path. And somewhere, Helena liked to think, her father smiled, knowing that the skills he had taught his daughter had not just saved her life, but had given her everything she needed to build a beautiful one. The end of their working years came gradually rather than suddenly. In their late 50s, Helena and James began spending more time training their successors and less time actively piloting. They promoted from within, elevating crew members who had proved themselves over the years. The Helena Rose continued to run her routes with a new captain and pilot at the helm, while James and Helena took on advisory roles. They still traveled on the boat frequently, unable to completely leave the river life behind, but they also began to establish a home base in St. Louis. The house they bought was modest by river baron standards, but it suited them perfectly. It was perched on a bluff overlooking the Mississippi, so they could watch the boats pass from their front porch. Helena planted a garden and discovered she enjoyed nurturing growing things when she was not navigating. James set up a workshop where he tinkered with mechanical designs and improved boat equipment, but they were never truly retired. The freight business they had built continued to grow, with Tommy managing the day-to-day operations and James providing strategic guidance. They added more boats to their small fleet, employed dozens of crew members, and became respected figures in the river trade community. When Helena was 60, an unusual honor came her way. The St. Louis River Pilots Association, which had never admitted a woman, voted to grant her honorary membership in recognition of her decades of exemplary service. At the ceremony, the association president acknowledged that Helena had broken barriers and proved that skill and dedication knew no gender. Helena accepted the honor with grace, but in her speech, she made sure to thank all the women who worked on the rivers in various capacities, often without recognition. I was fortunate to have a father who taught me these skills and a husband who respected them. But there are countless women who work the rivers in kitchens and laundries, as deck hands and engineers, who deserve recognition for their contributions to this industry. The speech was reported in newspapers throughout the region, and Helena received letters from women across the country thanking her for acknowledging their often invisible labor. As they moved through their 60s, Helena and James settled into a peaceful rhythm. They spent winters in St. Louis and summers traveling the river, visiting children and grandchildren, checking on their boats, and simply enjoying the water they both loved. Their love had only deepened over the decades. They moved together with the ease of long partnership, often communicating without words. Their arguments were brief, and their reconciliations sweet. They held hands like young lovers and still surprised each other with small gestures of affection. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their family threw a grand celebration aboard the Helena Rose. All of their children and grandchildren attended, along with crew members past and present, and friends from the river trade. It was a joyous affair, full of music and dancing and storytelling. James and Helena stood together at the ship's wheel, just as they had done thousands of times over the decades. But this time, they were surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. Children who were thriving, grandchildren who were growing, a successful business, and a legacy of skill and integrity. 40 years, James said, shaking his head in wonder. Some days it feels like yesterday that you walked up the gangplank with that determined look on your face. Some days it feels like we have always been together, like there was never a time when we were separate people rather than partners. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You are woven into every part of me, and you into me. We have had a good life, James, better than I ever dreamed possible when I was that desperate widow in St. Louis. We have had a magnificent life, and we are not done yet. They kissed, to the applause and cheers of their assembled family and friends. The Helena Rose rocked gently beneath them, the river flowing endlessly past, and the sky stretched overhead in infinite blue. The final years of their story were gentle ones, though not without the sorrows that come with age. They lost friends, including the Irish brothers who had been with them from the beginning. Helena's health began to fail in her late 60s, a heart condition that forced her to slow down even more. But they faced each challenge as they always had, together. James cared for Helena tenderly, helping her when walking became difficult, reading to her when her eyes grew tired, and holding her when the nights were long. On a spring morning in 1908, 54 years after their marriage, Helena woke in their St. Louis home with the sun streaming through the windows and the sound of the river in the distance. James was beside her, as he had been every morning of their married life. "I want to go to the boat," she said softly. "Helena," the doctor said. "I know what the doctor said, but I want to be on the river one more time. Please, James." He could never refuse her anything. They arranged for a carriage to take them down to the docks, where the Helena Rose was preparing for a cargo run. The crew welcomed them aboard with surprise and delight. James helped Helena up to the wheelhouse. She sat in the chair they kept there, looking out at the river she had navigated for so many years. The Mississippi flowed past, eternal and unchanging, carrying its load of silt and history and possibility. "Thank you," she said to James, "for everything, for taking a chance on a desperate widow, for loving me, for the life we built together. Thank you for steering yourself into my life, for being my partner in everything, for loving me back." Helena reached for his hand and held it tight. "The river is beautiful today. It is always beautiful to me because it brought you to me." They sat together in the wheelhouse, holding hands, watching the river flow past. Helena's breathing grew shallow and labored. James held her close, whispering words of love as her eyes closed for the last time. She passed peacefully, in the place she loved best, in the arms of the man who had been her true partner in every way. The crew stood silent on the deck below, honoring the woman who had become a legend on the river. James Dalton lived 3 more years, continuing to manage the family business but never quite recovering from the loss of his Helena. He visited her grave in the St. Louis Cemetery every week, bringing flowers and telling her about the boats and the grandchildren and all the small details of life that he had always shared with her. On his deathbed at 74, surrounded by children and grandchildren, his last words were, "Tell Helena I am coming. Tell her to watch for me on the river." They buried him beside her, their headstones simple but elegant, overlooking the Mississippi River they had both loved so well. The freight company they had built continued for 3 more generations, before finally being sold to a larger firm in the 1950s. But even then, the story of the widow who became a riverboat pilot and the captain who loved her was passed down through the family. Young Helena, named for her grandmother, became a river pilot herself, one of the first women to receive full commercial certification. She told her grandmother's story often, keeping the memory alive. And sometimes, river people swore they could see 2 figures in the wheelhouse of passing boats on misty mornings, standing side by side at the wheel, navigating the eternal river together as they had in life. The story of Helena and James became part of river lore, told in port cities and on boat decks, a reminder that love could be found in unexpected places, that courage and skill could open doors previously closed, and that true partnership meant navigating life's currents together, whatever challenges they might bring. The Mississippi River flowed on, as it always had and always would, carrying boats and dreams and the memories of all those who had loved it. And somewhere in its eternal flow were the spirits of Helena and James Dalton, forever young, forever together, forever navigating the beautiful, dangerous, generous river that had given them everything. Their story ended as all stories must, but the love they shared, the legacy they built, and the courage they showed lived on, inspiring others to be brave enough to choose their own path, to work for their passage, and to steer themselves straight into the life they were meant to live.